I grew up in a house where my last name was celebrated like a crown, but never on my head. My brother Santiago was the genius, the golden son, the one our parents paraded in front of neighbors as proof that the Morales family had made it in America. He was Harvard-bound before he even finished high school, his photo framed in the living room, his trophies shining beneath the chandelier. And me, I was the other son, the one they joked about in whispers, the boy who would never measure up. They never said my name with pride, only with disappointment, as if I were a failed draft of the masterpiece they already had in Santiago. My name is Adrian Morales, and for most of my life, I was invisible. I work long shifts at a repair shop off a dusty street in Chula Vista, fixing cars that never belonged to us. While Santiago prepared for boardrooms and headlines, I wiped grease from my hands before sitting down at family dinners, where no one cared enough to ask how my day had been. If Santiago was the symbol of success, I was the shadow cast behind him, useful only as contrast. The first time I realized how deep the gap was, I was 12. Santiago had just been accepted into a summer program at Stanford, and our parents threw a small party inviting relatives from all over California. My father raised his glass and declared, "This is what it means to be a Morales excellence, ambition, brilliance." Then he turned his eyes to me, pausing long enough for every smile in the room to shift toward me, waiting for the punchline. "And Adrian," he smirked, past PE this year, "we should be grateful for small victories." Laughter erupted. My uncle slapped his knee. My cousins giggled. Even my mother gave a polite laugh that sliced me deeper than any insult. I sat there, cheeks burning, wishing the earth would swallow me whole. That was the rhythm of my life. Santiago was the headline, I was the footnote. He got scholarships, I got sarcasm. He got praise. I got silence. At dinner, Santiago's stories of Harvard and internships filled the air, while my words evaporated before I even spoke. By the time I formed a sentence, the conversation had already moved on. I learned to eat quietly, to shrink smaller in my chair, to pretend the roll of their eyes didn't gut me like a knife. But there was one man who saw me differently. My grandfather, Alonso Morales. While my parents measured worth in grades and accolades, he asked me about my dreams, my thoughts, the things that made me happy. On his porch with the desert wind brushing past, he once leaned close and said, "Adrian, never mistake their blindness for truth. You carry something Santiago doesn't. One day you'll understand." I didn't know what he meant then. All I knew was that his words clung to me like a secret I wasn't ready to open. For years I told myself silence was safer than resistance, but silence has a way of burying you alive. And deep inside I began to wonder, what if my grandfather had seen something they refused to see? The older I got, the heavier that silence became, until the night it finally suffocated me. It was Santiago's coronation, though no one called it that. They disguised it as a celebration dinner at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown San Diego. Chandeliers blazed like suns' tuxedos, and gowns filled the room, and the air carried the scent of money and ambition. Everyone had come to toast my brother, the boy who had become a man, the man who had become a symbol. I watched from the margins, dressed in a suit borrowed from a cousin, its sleeves slightly too short. My place wasn't at the table of honor. It was near the kitchen doors, where waiters pushed out trays of champagne and filet mignon, brushing past me as though I were part of the staff. In many ways I was. My mother had asked me to help out quietly so I wouldn't draw attention, as if I could ever steal a fraction of Santiago's spotlight. When the lights dimmed and the microphone clicked on, my father stood tall at the podium. His voice carried with the confidence of a man who believed his legacy was secure. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, tonight we honor my brilliant son Santiago Morales, the pride of our family, the future of our empire. Applause erupted like a storm, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. I clapped too, though my hands felt numb, my chest hollow. Then came the words that crushed me flat against the floor. As of tonight, my father continued. Santiago will inherit the Morales real estate holdings valued at over $80 million. He will carry our name forward into a future brighter than any of us could imagine. The crowd leapt to its feet, roaring approval. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, overcome with pride. And me? I stood in the shadows, holding a tray of untouched glasses, wishing I could disappear into the wallpaper. I caught Santiago's eyes across the room. He raised his glass toward me, not in gratitude, but in mockery. A smirk curled his lips, a silent toast to my irrelevance. It was his way of saying you lost, again. I felt the heat rise in my face, the familiar sting of humiliation pressing into my ribs. But then I noticed someone watching me, not with scorn, not with pity, but with something else. Diego, my older cousin, leaned against the far wall. His tie loosened, a whiskey glass in hand. He'd once been the family's disappointment, failing at ventures no one cared to remember. Tonight his gaze locked on mine, steady and understanding, as though he recognized the weight crushing me. He gave me the faintest nod, not of sympathy, but of alliance. That night, beneath the glow of chandeliers meant for someone else, I realized something dangerous. Silence hadn't just buried me, it had trained me. And while Santiago basked in applause, something inside me began to stir like a voice I had caged for too long, whispering that my time in the shadows would not last forever. The applause had barely settled when the next act of Santiago's coronation unfolded. My father raised his hand for silence, and the room obeyed like soldiers before a general. Tonight, he declared, we honor not only Santiago's achievements, but also his future. And with that future comes the rewards he deserves. Two waiters wheeled in a silk-draped platform. When the cloth was pulled back, a brand-new Porsche gleamed under the ballroom lights, its metallic frame reflecting the stunned faces of the guests. Gasps filled the air, followed by another wave of applause. My brother's grin widened, his hand gliding across the hood, like he was touching destiny itself. And this, my mother added, stepping forward with a flourish, is only the beginning. Santiago will also take ownership of our penthouse in downtown San Diego, a home worthy of his brilliance. She kissed him on the cheek, her eyes sparkling with pride, the cameras flashing to capture the moment as though it were a royal ceremony. My chest tightened. The clinking glasses, the cheers, the congratulations, they all blurred into one deafening roar. For a moment I could hardly breathe. I had expected favoritism. I had braced myself for humiliation. But this was different. This was erasure. Then my father's eyes found me. And Adrian. He paused long enough for every head to turn, every gaze to pierce my skin. Perhaps now you'll be inspired to find steady work, a real job, something you can be proud of. His smirk drew laughter like a conductor commanding an orchestra. The guests chuckled politely, some uncomfortably, others without restraint. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The tray in my hand trembled, glasses rattling against each other like bones. I wanted to drop it, to walk out, to scream, but I stood there, nailed in place by their laughter. My brother raised his champagne, tipping it in my direction. "Don't worry, little brother," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Not everyone can be a Morales." Another round of laughter cracked like whips across my back. For years I had survived their whispers, their side comments, their sighs of disappointment, but never had the rejection been so public, so polished, so deliberate. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in me, it was that they wanted the world to know I didn't matter. I caught Diego's eyes again from across the room. He didn't laugh. His jaw clenched, his grip tightening around his glass. He gave me the faintest shake of his head, as if to say, "Don't let them bury you." That single look was a lifeline, the only thread keeping me from collapsing into myself. As the guests returned to their celebration, I stood in the shadows, the laughter still echoing like gunshots in my skull. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not with despair, but with the first spark of defiance. They thought they'd silenced me forever. What they didn't know was that silence can sharpen into a blade. The laughter still rang in my ears long after the clinking of glasses had faded. I stood rooted near the back of the ballroom, every nerve in my body raw, my tray abandoned on a side table. My father's smirk, Santiago's toast, the crowd's polite cruelty. It was all too much. I could feel the walls closing and the chandeliers above pressing down like judgment from on high. I turned toward the exit, desperate for air, for escape, for any corner of the night where I wasn't the Morales family's punchline. That's when I saw him. An old man standing perfectly still at the edge of the room, as though the chaos of celebration flowed around him without touching him. His suit was worn, his cane polished smooth from years of use, but it was his eyes that stopped me, cold, sharp, deliberate, fixed on me and me alone. He stepped forward with surprising steadiness, weaving through the crowd like a shadow that refused to be ignored. When he reached me, he didn't smile. He didn't clap me on the back like a relative pretending sympathy. Instead, he pressed something into my hands, a small wooden box darkened with age, the brass hinges scratched but strong. "This is yours," he whispered, his voice low and gravelly, a sound that seemed to come from another time. "Your parents hid the truth. Alonso wanted you to have this." My breath caught. "Alonso." "Your grandfather," he said simply, his eyes never wavering. "He trusted me. And now it's time." Before I could form another word, he straightened his jacket, gave the smallest nod, and disappeared back into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. No one else seemed to notice. The music swelled again, glasses were raised, and Santiago's name echoed in the room like a hymn. But all I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the scrape of the wooden box against my palm. I slipped out of the ballroom into the hotel corridor, the polished marble floor stretching like an endless runway. The air was cooler here, quieter, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was electric. I stared at the box, my fingers trembling along the carved edges. What could be inside? A letter proof. Some cruel trick meant to deepen the wound. I thought of my grandfather, the only one who had ever looked at me without judgment, the only one who had whispered that I carried something Santiago didn't. His words, long buried under years of scorn, surged back like a tide. Never mistake their blindness for truth. For the first time in my life, I held something that might shatter theirs. A secret. A weapon. Or maybe a chance to finally be seen. I clutched the box to my chest, the noise of the party muffled behind the doors. My family thought they had written the story of my life, that I would always be the shadow behind Santiago's light. But as I stared at the box, I realized something stories can change when the truth finally finds its voice. And tonight, the truth was in my hands. I stood alone in the corridor, the wooden box heavy in my hands, as though it carried more than wood and brass, like it carried the weight of generations. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath uneven. For a long moment, I didn't dare open it. What if it was empty? What if it was just another cruel reminder of my place in this family, forgotten, unwanted, unnecessary? But my grandfather's voice haunted me. Never mistake their blindness for truth. My fingers fumbled with the latch until it clicked open. The lid creaked, revealing papers bound together, their edges yellowed with time. On top rested an envelope with my name written in my grandfather's familiar hand, Adrian. I tore it open, my eyes erasing across the first lines. It was a will, not a copy. The original. My throat tightened as I read the words that turned my world upside down. To my grandson, Adrian Morales. I leave controlling interest in Morales Properties, the penthouse in San Diego, the accounts in my name, the company I built with my hands. I blinked the letters swimming on the page. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. For years I had believed I was the invisible one, the spare part of a family machine built only to showcase Santiago. Yet here in black ink and legal seals was proof that my grandfather had chosen me, not him. Beneath the will was a smaller bundle, handwritten pages bound with twine. My grandfather's journal. My hands shook as I flipped through the ink, pressing truths into me that burned hotter than any insult my parents had ever hurled. He wrote of his doubts about Santiago, his arrogance, his hunger for recognition without compassion. He wrote of me, of my endurance, my quiet strength, the way I listened when no one else cared. Humility is the foundation of leadership, he wrote. Adrian understands what they do not. But then came the revelation that nearly stole my breath. In his final entries, he explained how he had tried to make his wishes clear, how he entrusted documents to my parents for safekeeping. And then his handwriting grew sharper, angrier, how he realized they had betrayed him. They intend to crown Santiago at my expense. If they succeed, the company will rot from the inside. That is why I placed my trust in Miguel to deliver the truth when the time was right. I staggered back against the wall, the papers trembling in my hands. My parents, my own flesh and blood, had buried my worth to elevate Santiago. They had stolen not only my inheritance, but my very identity, reducing me to a caricature of failure so their chosen son could shine brighter. But tonight, their secret had surfaced. The wooden box wasn't just a gift. It was a reckoning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. I wasn't the boy in the shadows. I was the heir. And the truth was about to burn through every lie they had ever told. The papers trembled in my hands, but not from weakness, from power, from the raw electric charge of truth waiting to be unleashed. I tucked them inside my jacket, pressed against my chest like armor, and walked back toward the ballroom. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the floor itself wanted to hold me back. Inside, the celebration raged on. My father stood at the podium, his voice booming with authority, while Santiago basked in the glow of cameras and clinking glasses. The crowd laughed, easily drunk on champagne and illusion. They thought the story was finished, that Santiago's victory was sealed. They had no idea a new chapter was about to rip through the room. I felt the tremor in my legs as I climbed the first step of the stage, but I didn't stop. My father's eyes flicked toward me, irritation flashing like a blade. He leaned into the microphone, his smile tight. Adrian, this isn't your moment. Please step down. For years I had obeyed words like that. For years I had shrunk into silence at the first command. But not tonight. This is my moment. I said, my voice low, but steady. The microphone caught it, sending my words rippling across the ballroom. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Every head turned. Santiago chuckled, that familiar smirk stretching across his face. "Oh, little brother," he drawled, trying to steal the spotlight again. "Don't embarrass yourself." I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folder, and held it high. The Morales seal glinted beneath the chandelier lights. "I'm not the one embarrassing myself," I said. My voice rose stronger now, fueled by every insult, every slight, every wound I had carried in silence. "You are." Gasps cut through the room. My father's smile cracked, his jaw tightening. "What are you doing?" He hissed, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm telling the truth," I answered, flipping the folder open so the papers caught the light. "This company, this penthouse, this fortune you paraded as Santiago's, it doesn't belong to him. It belongs to me. My grandfather chose me." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some guests leaned forward, desperate to see the documents. Others whispered furiously, eyes darting between my father and me. Santiago's laugh faltered, slipping into something harsher, angrier. "Sit down before you make a fool of yourself," he spat, his voice trembling now. "Let him speak," a voice rang out from the back. I turned and saw him. Marco, my childhood friend I hadn't seen in years, standing tall among the crowd. His voice carried like thunder. "Haven't you all silenced him long enough?" The room stilled. My chest swelled. For once I wasn't alone. I tightened my grip on the papers, lifted them higher, and looked directly into my father's eyes. "You built your empire on arrogance and lies, but my grandfather saw something you never did, and tonight the truth takes its place on this stage, whether you want it here or not." The room was a storm, voices colliding, champagne spilling, chairs scraping against marble. My father barked for order, his voice raw with fury, but the crowd no longer belonged to him. Their eyes were on me, on the papers in my hands, on the trembling edge of a dynasty unraveling. Then the chaos parted, and a single voice cut through like a blade. "He speaks the truth." I turned. From the back of the ballroom, the old man stepped forward, Miguel. The same man who had placed the wooden box in my hands. His cane tapped against the floor, with each step steady, commanding. The crowd hushed, as though instinctively recognizing authority. "I was entrusted by Alonso Morales himself," Miguel said, his voice firm despite his years. "He gave me the original will. He told me to protect it until Adrian was ready. Until this night." Gasps rippled. My father's face drained of color, then flushed red. "Lies," he thundered. The old man was confused at the end. He didn't know what he was signing. Miguel's eyes narrowed. Alonso knew exactly what he was doing, and he chose Adrian because he saw what you refused to see. All at once, Santiago surged forward, grabbing for the papers. His mask of superiority cracked, replaced by desperation. "This is mine!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "It was always supposed to be mine." I yanked the documents back, holding them high for the crowd to see. "It was never yours," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "You wore the crown they handed you, but it was stolen." Then another voice rose, unexpected, rough, with years of silence. "Diego." He stood from his corner table, whiskey forgotten, his eyes blazing. "I saw it happen," he said. The room shifted toward him. "Years ago, Alonso gave your parents his will. I was in the study when they whispered to each other, saying it needed to disappear. They buried it so Santiago could shine. I kept quiet because I thought it wasn't my fight. But watching this tonight..." His fists clenched. "I won't stay silent anymore." The crowd erupted again, this time in shock, outrage, disbelief. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide, her perfect facade collapsing. My father turned on Diego with venom. "You traitor!" "No." Diego snapped, his voice sharp as broken glass. "The only traitors are the ones who betrayed their own father's last wish." I looked at Santiago then, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. The arrogance drained, leaving only a boy clutching at a throne built on lies. The applause that had once wrapped around him like armor was gone. All he had now was silence, and my truth. The Morales name cracked that night, splintering under the weight of secrets exposed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. The ballroom was still buzzing, fragments of voices clashing against the chandeliers, but I no longer heard them. My father's shouts, my mother's sobs, Santiago's desperate protests, all of it faded into background noise. The truth had been spoken, and it rang louder than any applause ever given to my brother. I stepped down from the stage, the papers pressed tight against my chest, and the crowd parted as though I were carrying fire. Their eyes followed me, some in awe, some in disbelief, others in shame for having laughed at me minutes before. But no one stopped me. Not even my father, who stood trembling, his face twisted in rage, but his power crumbling like ash between his fingers. The hotel doors swung open, and the cool night air rushed over me like a baptism. San Diego's skyline glittered against the dark towers lit like beacons. I had walked these streets 1,000 times before, always feeling the city belonged to others' people, more successful, more deserving, more seen. But tonight the lights seemed different. They no longer mocked me. They welcomed me. For the first time, I lifted my head and felt taller than the shadows that had haunted me all my life. I was no longer the boy standing in the corner of family dinners waiting for scraps of recognition. I was no longer the servant in my own house. I was Adrian Morales, the heir my grandfather believed in, the man who had survived their cruelty without letting it hollow him out. I thought of Santiago, his smirk finally erased, his crown slipping from his grasp. I thought of my father, whose voice once dictated my worth, but now sounded like an echo of a broken man. And I thought of my grandfather Alonso, whose words had carried me through years of silence. Never mistake their blindness for truth. He had been right. Their blindness did not define me. My silence had not destroyed me. It had forged me. I walked farther into the night, each step heavier with responsibility, but lighter with freedom. The inheritance was not just money or buildings or a company's seal. It was a chance to build something honest from ruins, a chance to honor the man who saw me when no one else did, a chance to prove that worth is not measured by applause, but by the strength to rise when the world tries to bury you. So if you've ever been called useless, if you've ever been shoved into the shadows of someone else's spotlight, remember this: the truth has its own timing, and when it arrives, it will not whisper. It will thunder. That night, under the glow of San Diego's lights, I finally understood I was never the forgotten one, I was the chosen one, son. And the story of my life was only just beginning. If this story touched something deep inside you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments how it made you feel, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We read every message, and if you want more powerful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy. Your support means everything as we keep bringing these voices to light.